Progress.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I will call to order the Metro work session of January 30th, 2024. Connor, will you please start the roll, call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Present.
Councillor Nolan.
Present.
Councillor Rosenthal.
Present.
Councillor Wong.
Present.
Councillors Gonzalez and Simpson are both excused today, and Council President Peterson.
Here, thanks. Before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
I'm Laura Lepley, a Metro Park Ranger. Here at Oxbow Park, safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Welcome Center and you're at the Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairway to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by the reception desk, and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at Oxbow Park.
All right, we will start our agenda and start with Safe Streets for All update. As you all know, Metro has been working with regional partners to develop data-driven safety strategies for over a decade. Metro is initiating a 2-year federally funded Safe Streets for All program to build on and advance regional efforts for safer streets, especially for pedestrians. A new Metro report, Safe Streets for All, a transportation safety update to JPAC and Metro Council, provides a starting place to discuss opportunities to advance safety in the next 2 years. We have Catherine Charlo, our Metro Director of Planning, Research, and Development, and Lake Mateague, Principal Transportation Planner, here to give a presentation. Thank you. Catherine.
Thank you so much, Council President Peterson and Council, for having us here to talk about what all too often is not a super fun topic, which is traffic safety. But this is a really positive thing that we're excited to talk to you about, which is the grant we received from FHWA last year to do safety coordination with some of our regional partners. So just really looking forward to sharing some of that with you. Lake McTighe, who's with me, was the lead author for the $3 million proposal that we won. Half of that came to Metro, half of it went to our partners. She's going to share a little bit about the work plan, and we'll talk a little bit about what Tigard, Washington County, Multnomah County, and some of the East Multnomah County cities are putting our heads together to move forward. As Council President Peterson noted, pedestrian safety is central to that, as are safety on urban arterials and the need for more regional coordination and funding. All of that came out really strongly in our conversations last fall about the Regional Transportation Plan, and we are excited to share this next set of implementation steps to make some positive progress on that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lake to share a little bit about the work.
All right, thank you, Catherine, and got the slides up, thank you. It's been a while since I've been in front of council, so for those counselors that I haven't met with, my name is Lake McTighe, and I'm a Principal Transportation Planner in the Regional Planning Group, and I'm also the Project Manager, Program Manager for our Transportation Safety Program. Next slide, please. So why are we here today? It's to provide an overview of the Safe Streets for All program and the grant, to hear from you on some options on how we can elevate safety and make progress on our identified safety outcomes moving forward over the next 2 years as we implement the program and work with our partners, and also to receive any feedback that you might have on the Safe Streets for All report that was included in the packet. I will say I'm not going to focus on the content of that report today. I'll talk a little bit about how we're using it, but if any questions come up around what was in the report, it's update on the data where we are. I've got some slides to reflect back on that. So next slide, please. So A little bit more about the grant that Catherine gave a preview on. So this, we applied for the FY 2022 grant. It's a federal grant. We were awarded last year in 2023. We purposely held off on starting the grant as we were wrapping up the regional transportation plan. But now we are just now kicking off implementation of that. As Catherine said, we led the proposal and the application, and Washington County, the city of Tigard, and East Multnomah County and the cities of East Multnomah County are subrecipients, and we are administrating half of the grant to them to develop local transportation safety action plans. There are 3 more grant cycles coming up, and I just mentioned that to keep that in mind as we're talking about implementation opportunities. There's both pilot program opportunities, implementation for capital projects, and more planning, but it does require a 20% match. And our partners have been interested in having Metro lead in this area because, as you know, the sort of administrative burden of administering a federal grant is not small. And so it's been a good service for our partners to be taking that role on and administering the grant for them to develop these local safety action plans. We will be, I'm working quite closely with these local jurisdictions and bringing best practices with them and helping them kind of make sure that these plans fulfill the federal requirements and get them ready to ask for more federal funds.
This is
Oh, I'm
just
sorry,
my
I thought you were
notes.
asking me a question. Next slide,
I'll hide
please.
my notes from you.
No, that's fine. All right, so a little bit about the program. So half of the grant funds, $1.5 million, we have available to really expand what we're doing in terms of safety over the next 2 years. We're aiming to spend all the grant funds by the end of 2025. And the focus of the program is listed in these bullets here on this slide. We're really focusing on coordinating and collaborating with partners on data, on legislation, our strategies, projects, engagement. We are looking to, I think one of our focuses is how can we increase and diversify leadership and engage practitioners and communities. We're leading with equity and public health. We have a goal to really expand the understanding and application of the safe system approach, which has been applied successfully around the world and has led to a steep reduction in serious injuries related to traffic crashes. Growing a culture of safety in a positive way so that we can start to have more shared values around safety and a shared understanding of how we get to our desired outcomes. Developing and sharing data and analytics, this is a place that Metro can really lead in and support our local jurisdictions, especially smaller communities that don't have as many resources. And then focusing on implementing the identified policies and projects that are in the 2023 RTP. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned desired outcomes a couple times. This slide has distilled policies that are in our adopted plans and strategies. What are we trying to achieve by implementing these programs? So we really want to see moving towards a reduction of fatal and serious injury crashes. We have adopted targets of 0 fatalities and serious injuries by 2035. We want to ensure that the safe system approach, which is being used by the FHW, the Federal Highway Administration, and other communities around in the country, that we want to ensure that that's used and that traffic speeds are lowered, which really reduces the risk of death and injury, and that safety increases for all users. We want an outcome where safety is prioritized in all transportation projects and equity outcomes improve. And that means making sure that questions around safety are brought up as projects move forward from planning through design and construction. Seeking immediate, low-cost, effective treatments that are implemented without waiting necessarily for larger projects that may take 20, 30 years to come to fruition. So what can we do to improve safety in the next 5 years? And then ensuring that safety is a key consideration when defining system adequacy or deficiency. And that made a huge leap forward with our new mobility policy in the Regional Transportation Plan. So this is the one data slide that I'm going to show today. And it's, I want to point out that our region has one of the lowest traffic fatality rates of any metropolitan area in the country. As I'll describe in the next slide, that has a lot to do with decisions that we've made in the last decades as a region. And it's important to note that because we can look to what is working here and do more of that. At the same time, the part of this graph that I want to call your attention to is the dotted line moving up. That is our forecasted trend for traffic fatalities if we don't make a change. The sort of blue line going downwards are our targets. So we're not currently moving in the right direction, but we do have very ambitious targets. We have a 0 target for 2035. So I'm trying to walk that fine line of noting the urgency to address traffic safety while also acknowledging what's working here and the fact that we don't want to, we want to acknowledge that we're being ambitious and know what we're doing right. Next slide, please. So while we're kicking off this program and beginning implementation of this program with these funds, we're not starting fresh. We are building on a very strong foundation. First of all, we're benefiting from decades of land use planning and investments in transit and biking and walking. And that has led to lower vehicle miles traveled per capita, which leads to lower traffic crashes overall in our region. We've been working with partners for over a decade on planning for safety at the metropolitan level. And that we had developed our first plan that came out in 2012, excuse me. And that has, there's been countless workshops, meetings, discussions with our partners as we develop shared kind of understanding around safety. We're really leading the nation. I meet with MPOs around the country and that are looking to what Metro has done around transportation safety. And we are one of the first regions to have adopted Vision Zero targets and regional policies for safety. And then this program is really building on everything that's in the Regional Transportation Plan that was just adopted and helping implement those policies and the projects and programs that are in that plan. Next slide, please. So the report that is in your packet, the purpose of this was we have an adopted safety strategy, which was a data-driven strategy from 2018. And we developed a progress report 2 years later that said, how are we doing on implementing the strategies and actions in that strategy? And then this report was really just an update on looking at the most recent crash data that we had from the Oregon Department of Transportation, reviewing on what had been done, what still could be done, and we're using it to frame some initial discussions with regional partners. And we had a presentation to JPACT in December, which was a very robust discussion. Councillor Lewis was there. And it was, I think it went on for, it was like a 45-minute discussion, so it was really good to hear from our partners. I'll be going to the different coordinating committees around transportation and other groups to talk about, you know, this kind of new updated data. But the trends have not changed. So that's what we're going to be focusing on, is pedestrian safety, on alcohol, distracted driving, intoxicated driving, road safe urban arterials, things like that. So this report is really just to help provide a framing device for those conversations moving forward. Next slide. So this slide is really framing up some things to keep in mind for our discussion that, today. And thinking about, as we're trying to get to a shared strategy moving forward. There's a lot of strategies out there. There's a lot of adopted policies, plans, but there's also not clear agreement amongst the decision makers, elected officials, and stakeholders out there about what strategies should we focus on, and when and how should we do it. So Metro is a leader in safety, but we don't own or operate the transportation system. So thinking about that in terms of our role and how we can influence safety in the region. Safety, as you know, intersects with many current and future policy efforts that Metro is going to be engaged in or is engaged in, including legislation, coalition building, funding discussions. So how can we make sure that safety is elevated and integrated in those efforts? And as I said, while there's agreement that safety is important, there's certainly not agreement about how, what to do. And I think we saw that at the JPACT conversation. At the state level, there's wide array of opinions about how to address safety. Everything from, you know, building more freeways because they are the safest roadways in the system to making it harder to drive. So those are, you know, pretty different strategies. And then I think it's important for us to keep in mind that while achieving, kind of turning that trend around could take many years, it's helpful to reflect back, cast back, and understand that what the things that we did 20 years ago are bearing fruit, the positive things that we did. So we want to keep plugging away at it, and not to sort of have that sense of agency that what we are doing, even if it's not an immediate turnaround, will still have a very important effect. And that from my work, I've seen that leadership is key, and keeping safety at the forefront. It's a false sort of idea that we have to have trade-offs, like safety or focus on climate, safety or mobility. I think those are false trade-offs, that improving safety will improve climate outcomes, will improve equity outcomes, will improve mobility outcomes. And so if we can find those strategies that make sense to people, to see those shared outcomes being achieved, I think that's one of the things we want to focus on in this program. Next slide. So 2 more slides. So this slide, before we get to the discussion questions and kind of talk about what the council's role could be in this program and helping advance and elevate safety, as you already do. We're developing an engagement strategy, and we'll look really closely at what are the key places that we want to highlight safety and elevate safety. Who are the key players that would benefit from having a deeper dive into the safe system approach or understanding some of the data? This slide provides a few examples of some of Metro's unique strengths and role in this arena of safety. So, Council, you're passionate about improving traffic safety and equity. That's clear from the policies that you've championed, the strategies and plans that you've adopted. And so engaging diverse decision makers and leaders and having that, that coalition of people that doesn't have to be everyone, but that are very passionate about and believe that we can have a different transportation system that improves safety. We have regionally adopted safety outcomes, and that is unique. A lot of regions don't have that. And so we have this already a shared understanding. Even if everyone doesn't totally buy into those yet, we have them in place and we can start to have that engagement, more robust engagement to get that buy-in. This is a priority for federal partners, and so it's an opportunity to increase funding and resources for Metro and also for our regional partners around this. And then we convene and are involved in many projects and decisions and committees, and these are opportunities, even if it's not about the Safe Streets for All program per se, it's an opportunity to elevate these concepts around safety. So next slide. So the questions that we're framing today is that with all of this in mind, with this sort of context, this the arena that we're in today, the challenges that we are real in terms of turning safety around, and I'm happy to expand on those the information that was in the safety report. Where do you see, council, or where would you like to see opportunities to advance regional safety policy in the upcoming year and advance on those outcomes that we have in our adopted plans? And where do you see opportunities to engage other leaders in this area to strengthen coalitions for safety? And we obviously have some ideas as JPAC work plan is being developed. Legislative agendas are coming out. At the staff level, there's many opportunities, but we were seeing this as an opportunity to sort of hear from you as we are putting together this engagement strategy, which won't be your typical sort of engagement plan for a plan. It's more of like a targeted strategy of who to talk to, where are we going to see the greatest benefit and value in building a stronger regional coalition around safe streets for all. So,
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to the one counselor who's on JPAC today. Counselor Lewis, would you like to start out with maybe your observations at JPAC?
Sure. Thank you so much, Lake. Thanks for referencing the discussion that we had at JPAC. It was a really good discussion. And I do think that people across the region are prioritizing safety first in the system right now. And I do think that, as you pointed out, is not at odds with meeting other goals around climate and equity, but it's what we see and hear every day. And it's basically the bare minimum when you think about where we should be making investments. So a lot of action at the JPAC table. Obviously, a lot of thought through how we were making investments because we were in that RTP kind of cycle mindset. But I think coming out of that, looking at the leadership opportunities, particularly beyond just the investments that we're making in how the built environment reacts to safety and makes the travel corridors accessible for different modes or all modes. There are also concerns around coming out of the past couple of years, people not believing the rules are for them. So traditionally, I think the human error part has been attributed to distraction, intoxication, et cetera. And I think we're seeing new trends with just willful ignoring of traffic rules. And some of that's tied to enforcement, which gets harder to talk about because we have so many different jurisdictions with different approaches. But I think universally, we need to have a conversation around the human behavior aspect as well as the traditional role we've played with investments in the built environment. And thinking forward, I'm happy to have JPAC continue to prioritize this in their work plan. I would like to see us consider ways to engage beyond the JPAC table, particularly because we have cities that are struggling with traffic safety right now who do not have a seat at the table. They're obviously represented, other cities' representatives, but I think we should do a call to see who's interested and set out a work plan to engage leaders from across the region. And we need to do it with haste. There are a lot of questions around safety projects that have been proposed on the Nexus list. If ODOT is gonna move forward with tolling, that OTC has made it clear they have no interest in funding. So we've got a lot of concerns to adapt not only to the environment as it's currently used, but a potential future use where we've got a lot of diversion that we can expect.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do have on my draft strategy, you had mentioned a charrette as well, like investigating at some of those, smaller investments that could be easily done to kind of get that understanding, maybe more at the engineering level. So that's also one of it. Thank you, Counselor.
Counselor Wong.
Great. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you both for your work over the years and improving safety in our region. And it's interesting to see kind of like how that has compounded over time. So thank you for all you've done. I was talking with the Vision Zero staff over at PBOT the last couple of weeks, and they were telling me that kind of the increase that we saw over the last couple of years was a result of human error, but also, the folks that have experienced traffic violence, a lot of them are unhoused or suffering from, mental health crises. And, as an agency that also has a housing department and a supportive housing, program, it really does seem like there's a link between this increase in fatalities and also kind of everything else that's happening on the street in terms of, the chronically houseless. So I'm wondering, what kind of steps are you taking to like bring those together, maybe with regional partners or our housing team? Just because I think those are kind of interlinked crises more than people might think about. It was kind of news to me, but made sense as to why that we've seen that experience. And then also, I know some of our local jurisdictional partners have like camping bans on arterials. And I'm wondering as to like what effectiveness they might have. I don't know if there's any data on that. And, I think a lot of people might say that they're just kind of an excuse to do more sweeps, for example, but maybe there is some safety benefit to it. I don't know, but I think there's that linkage that I'd really like to see explored more, and maybe you can speak on what conversations or actions have happened.
Yeah, I can say a bit, and then if you want to add stuff.
Might add something too.
So at the meta level, we're leading with equity and with public health in this, and kind of how we are, our analysis, what the deeper dive, we have an opportunity to really try to understand some of those questions that you just brought up now with these additional resources. So we have been working with our partners in public health and at the City of Portland, for example, on discussing the impact of houselessness, people without housing, people that have much more exposure because they are living on the streets, are much more vulnerable to dying in a traffic crash. And across the country, not just here, people with lower income, people that are more vulnerable for multiple reasons are more vulnerable to dying in traffic crashes. And so the strategies and the policies that we look at need to take that into account and address that to be effective if we're going to address fatalities. So there's a strong intersection between economic sustainability and health, between housing security, between mental health and substance abuse, resources. So there's a strong intersection between those things and traffic safety. And it's, so supporting what we can do to improve traffic safety for everyone will improve traffic safety for those most vulnerable people. So we are going to be working quite closely with public health in both our analysis and just development of our strategies. In the current update that I provided for you, I drew a lot from Multnomah County's public health assessment of traffic fatalities, which looked at death certificates and housing for those individuals that were killed. So there is a correlation. I don't think there's enough data to understand if sweeping arterials or banning camping along any type of, like a freeway or arterial, leads to less traffic deaths, and there's not, data on that. I think, housing people is probably much more effective, the most effective strategy. So we have had a few years ago, we did have some opportunities to collaborate with the housing program here, and that was looking at some of the it was, a very kind of crisis management type getting together and working together. And I do think there's opportunities, just as we've worked for years with our, partners in Todd, and like the more that you can make transportation safe and affordable, that supports people having additional resources for housing, example. So, I think there's opportunities to collaborate.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just didn't see that public health lens as clear in the presentation, and it seems like you're.
Yeah, I
you've
didn't
considered
touch on it in the, I'm happy to, I did have some additional slides in the presentation. I wanted to keep it short for the discussion, but public health is a key lens that we're using for our.
Yeah, it just seems like,
strategies.
the traditional kind of Vision Zero, like focus on infrastructure, education, enforcement, like that's not getting the results that we need in this moment.
Yeah.
So like, what is that other thing that we also need to be doing and incorporate? But it seems like you're on it, so thank you.
Absolutely.
I just have two things to add. One is thank you for the suggestion about connecting better with our housing department and supportive housing services, and noted, and I'll work on that and try to come up with some concrete ways to make that connection. The other thing I would say is the public health approach that Lake described is central and pivotal. And the strategies that we have outlined for the past decades to make streets safer remain the strategies, right? Like the public health approach is about how we get buy-in for those strategies, how we make decisions about where to apply them. But fundamentally, the strategies of slowing down traffic and making roadway crossings more accessible and really trying to create a more humane and protective system remain the most critical strategies. And they are going to remain that for everyone who uses the system, whether they're living on the side of the roadway or whether they're just driving through to get to and they're a housed person. So I think one of the things we are hoping for with this work is to keep elevating that, because sometimes those decisions to make those strategies, to move those strategies forward, can feel like they're in conflict with other desires for the system, and they're hard sometimes to fund. So, but the public health wraparound is crucially important as well. So thank you for both of those observations.
Great. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I get a little frustrated about this whole strategy thing. I think it's important to bring out the behavioral elements, but what I haven't heard yet, and perhaps this study will do that, is a clear explanation of why we're moving in the wrong directions. Obviously, we have some priorities, but they haven't worked. We're moving in the wrong direction. Now, maybe it's behavioral. But if you have somebody who has having a behavioral crisis and runs out in the middle of 122nd, all the design elements are not going to make that safer. That person is going to be in danger no matter what happens. So I think the first thing is to really figure out what's causing it. We have Portland has had a much safer streets program with lower speeds. We have automobiles that have early warning and stopping capabilities. We've increased safety in a lot of the technical ways. So the question is first, where do we need to focus our energies? And if it's on the behavioral, then that's a very different question than if it's on the structural, which is the actual physical systems. So, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be working on the physical systems aspects. And I have two, I could pose them as questions, but I'm going to pose them as suggestions. First of all, I think we should be going into the RTP and looking at all the programs, all the RTP identified projects that identified and evaluating them, whether they have a safety component and whether that safety component can be improved. Secondly, we should be looking at all our high capacity corridors, looking at the major corridors, particularly the ones with the high, that have some safety, and developing a corridor-specific program, and it may be structural changes such as better crossings, et cetera, but we should have a safety component for each one of those major corridors. And third, we're gonna have to deal with the diversion element, as that's been pointed out, and we are not getting a great deal of help on that. I don't have any suggestions on how we deal with that, but we do know that if there's going to be diversion from a tolling system in the wrong, that is structured the wrong way, we're going to have more crises. And we're going to have a safety program that's going to deal with these various, these various diversion elements. There's a number in my areas and Councilor Lewis's elements. I don't know how we approach the human element. That's always going to be there. I know alcohol is still a problem. Other things are still problems, and maybe it would be good to get a handle on if we get rid of functional homelessness, chronic homelessness, will that change the trajectory of the curve? I'm not sure, but I haven't heard that analysis yet, and so I think that's one of the first things that we need to see.
Yeah, well, so what I'll say is I appreciate that you're diving into the details, and I'll say yes to all of that. We are, we're actually doing a lot of that analysis. So we have a very good understanding of what contributes to traffic crashes occurring, serious traffic crashes. Speed is one of them, and vehicles are now going, can go faster, and there has been an increase in travel speeds in the last decade. Vehicles are heavier and larger. That's contributing to seriousness of traffic fatalities. And actually, the design of 122nd that you mentioned, if the design were different, it actually could change the outcome of someone running out into traffic. If traffic was traveling a lot slower, if there was a median, if there was more protection. So there's, and we have done a safety analysis for projects in the RTP, a high-level analysis. We know which projects are considered safety projects and would benefit safety. We can look at the details of those individual projects, and there's a wide spectrum of the types of treatments that those projects would, what they could do. Some are more focused perhaps on safety features for people driving. Others are more focused on a pedestrian safety, for example. But we have done a pretty high-level analysis of projects in the RTP to get a sense, at least, and this is really, we're the only region that has done this, a sense of like what projects would get the most safety benefit. Especially we know which projects are safety projects that are also on our high injury corridors where the most serious and fatal crashes are occurring. And we actually know most of the strategies that work. The safe system approach, you don't just focus on roads or just focus on safe people. It's safe people, safe roadways, safe vehicles, safe speeds, and then post-crash care. That's really the framework of the safe system approach. And you need all of those as a complex functioning transportation system to work. Safe people is both people that know how to use a transportation system. they have a driver's license, they had safe routes to school, those kinds of things. But they're also, in our society where we're seeing more aggressive behavior, we're seeing more intoxication, those are also parts of the safety. So I appreciate all those, the sort of, you got into the meat of it, and we are addressing a lot of the points that you brought up. Those are really important. And I'm happy to, also meet with you if you would like to see more of the detailed, like, analysis and work plans that we've done.
Well, I mean, just one follow-up comment is, I'm not aware of any place where speeds have been allowed to increase in heavily traffic zones. If anything, they've reduced in most cases. So speed is a big issue, but why have we not seen progress in that regards? Like I said, the city of Portland has reduced speed limits in all its residential areas. Has it had an impact? I haven't, I keep trying to reduce speed on the street that goes by my thing, and the state won't let me.
Yeah, I think there's, from my work, is that places that have a more sort of comprehensive reduction in speeds, so not just on some smaller streets, but also on arterials. Hoboken, New Jersey, which is only 80,000 people, very dense area, hasn't had any serious crashes for several years. Their Vision Zero program they've turned the trend around, they've gone towards zero, but every single street in Hoboken is 25 miles per hour.
Okay.
Including arterials, there's no 45-mile-an-hour roads in Hoboken, and they have a lot more people walking and biking now, and so it's just a slower environment, there's more time to react. In a safe system, 30 miles per hour is too fast. So, because you just don't have time, a driver doesn't have time to react and slow down for any type of crash. Whether it's vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to pedestrian. So safe speeds, there are places that have done more of a blanket approach to lowering speeds have seen more success. Because it's also clearer for the people using the system if you just know what the speed limit is everywhere. It doesn't change from road to road, so.
And Counselor, just as a follow-up, your observation about the road that you live on and the role that the state plays, that is something that the team can be working on. If a number of jurisdictions come together and think about, is there a policy solution, a legislative solution that tries to look at how a more uniform application of speeds could work? And that would definitely require some work probably at the legislative level and certainly at the state level in conjunction with ODOT.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, is just that if we were to lower speeds across the region, would we see a reduction in serious crashes? Absolutely. And with the, investments in infrastructure to make that happen, would that be really hard to do? Absolutely. So that's kind of where we are with a lot of our strategies right now, is we do know the countermeasures that would work, and most of them now, we're at the place where it's like, those are the hard ones to do. It's really hard just to daylight parking, right? Remove a few parking spots from near stop signs. That's very challenging. It really increases safety, and it's really hard to do. People don't want to see less parking. It's hard to prevent a right on red. People don't want to see that happening, and yet that has huge safety benefits. So there's things that are almost practically free to do, and yet are very challenging to do. And that's part of this work, is to look at those things that could be very effective, have huge safety benefits, and also will require a lot of political coordination to get done.
The corridor analysis might lead to some larger, suggestions to the state on some of their policies. And I don't think we're going to get to zero, but it would be nice to turn that trajectory around.
Yeah.
Counselor Nolan, and before we go back around, I'd like to weigh in.
Madam President, just following up quickly, you alluded to the psyche of drivers evolving. That wasn't your term, but that's what I took from it. And you just now were talking about mechanisms for changing behavior when the signs are insufficient, the speed limits and the stop signs? And what role and how can Metro provide a leadership in kind of a public education effort around this? I don't know that we'll change everyone's behavior, but an awareness of the impact that those parking spaces near a stop sign have on safety, or a rolling stop having on safety, or, you know, entering the intersection when the light is fully red. Seems that's got to be a big part of it. And where's the initiative for that? Where's the funding for that?
Well, there's a lot of different ways we could approach that. So we did a very successful campaign several years ago that we coordinated with ODOT and the City of Portland on. It was the Sasquatch crossing. Every crosswalk, every intersection is a crosswalk. And we did a fun campaign with that, and people liked it. It was positive, and I think it probably educated some people that every intersection is a crosswalk, whether or not it has an actual painted crosswalk. So
And I
education.
rely on that, and drivers honk their horn at me.
Yeah,
I tell them, stop, it's an intersection, and they yell at me. So we haven't been completely successful. Let's find a way to expand that.
I think part of what we're going to be doing in this work is to we're going to do a fun matrix, couple fun matrix exercises to see where do we get the biggest bang for our dollar. And education through the DMV is not very frequent, maybe once in your life. So I don't think driver recertification is a popular concept, but that would be one way that you could get, people re-education. Like, you'd have to go back and take a driving test. A lot of people don't want to do that. But laws change, things change. There's other ways to educate drivers of new information. I think that maybe investing in things like Safe Routes to School is actually when children, middle schoolers, even high schoolers continue to have sort of transportation education, that may have the most lasting effect. As you learn how to be a user of the transportation system in all ways, walking, biking, taking transit, and then eventually driving, if you have that education early. I like to look at other really successful campaigns like recycling. Recycling campaigns that taught kids how to recycle, those were successful. They brought it home. They talked to their parents. They're like, Mom, Dad, why are you throwing out that plastic cup? We can recycle that. So I think that kind of education is important, and it will be very important with things like distracted driving and cell phone use. So I don't really have the answer there, but I agree that that's one of the important strategies, so.
All right, I'll weigh in, and then Councilor Lewis wants to play cleanup. I just want to start with thanking you for that question of how do you want to engage council. And then we'll get to how does Metro, what are the techniques. I think just for everyone, Metro Council is an asset. And so thank you for asking of how to use us. We don't get that question very often, and I think it's an important one. And I think you use us to highlight. We can bring a flashlight to a topic that is important and allow others to speak. But by us being there, by us kicking it off, it is not just about an elected official trying to get press. And I think that we get wound around the axle sometimes about that, but it is the fact that there's an elected official there that gets the press there to shine the light on it. And I think we need to figure out how to do that better. One of the ideas that came to mind, and this is my first comment, is I totally understand and recognize why you're narrowing the scope of safety in this regard. But we have operators, transit operators out there that are under attack on a daily basis. and have asked for some help in getting attention to that issue. So safety to me is a much broader conversation, and if we want to actually attract attention to this issue, I don't think we start where we want to start. I think we start where the public wants to start, and I don't think we actually know where they're at in terms of their perception of what is safe and not safe. We understand that they don't want to be necessarily walking downtown at night for a variety of safety issues in downtown Portland, but we have 23 cities that are all experiencing some sort of different safety issue on our streets, and I think we need to figure out where they're at, and I think that would be my first ask, is that we don't always just in our echo chamber of research and, right, we need to understand a little bit more of what's going on in order to get to that coalition. So that's my second point. That helps address how we can be used, but it can also address how, what is the range of people that really need to be at that table? And if we need operators and we need a truck driver or two at that table, I think we need to have them, because it's not just a pedestrian issue, it's also a truck driver does not want to run into a pedestrian. But we need that perspective at the table. And so let's not so narrow this that we, again, create another echo chamber. And that goes to my other point, that we need to, as Metro, understand that there's a minimum threshold of engagement, and then additional engagement on top of that to get where we need to go. That means including a broad range of people from the entirety of the region. 100% of the region needs to feel that somehow they were, or their interest group was contacted and given a heads up that we were doing this and asked for their perspective, and then work to engage folks that need to be at the table with their lived experience as well. We need to be able to balance both of those things. And so I think from a council policy perspective, that, right, the operator needs to be there, the truck driver needs to be there, the community leader needs to be there, but somebody who drives and is older needs to be there, AARP, right? So we need all of these to get an idea of what we're actually seeing. I'm going to go to the 5 E's, whether you want me to or not. The 5 E's in this world are education, encouragement, engineering, enforcement, and evaluation. And I'd like to see us coalesce around how we engage in each of the 5 E's, because I'm hearing a lot of engineering, and I think that's great. As the engineer at the table, I think there's a lot to be done in that arena, but the single most important phrase that helped me become a better engineer was to hear that we can't engineer our way out of bad behavior by the Dr. Tung, who was on the Oregon Transportation Safety Committee 20-some years ago. That is not what we're taught. And if we overindulge in the engineering portion of this, we are actually increasing, I think, the engineers' anxiety that they have to solve for everything. And if we back away from education and encouragement and all of these other things that would be considered soft but are actually more effective in the long run, then I think that we aren't doing our due diligence. So I would say that we need to include the entirety and find effective things that rise to the top on all 5 of those things, because they have been found effective as we have started collecting data over the last 10 to 15 years. And we know what's going to be more effective, but just the fact that nobody here knows what the zipper is, I can't. There are so many things that we could be doing as JPAC, as coalitions, that would start to highlight, actually what people are seeing on the street and what they need to know, and reminding them coming out of COVID that speeding kills. So, and the only thing that I will wrap up is whatever we do, there is all of this, but then there is the technology. And I'm going to want to see the things that we can include, from federally changing the definition of what money can be used at, coming from USDOT on safety, that it does include pedestrian bike and whatever federal work that we're doing there, to what is the AI that we are gonna wanna see on all cars going forward? So that people who, like me, are getting blinded by LED lights at night in the rain, have a car that's gonna tell you there's something there and you shouldn't turn right.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what to do about that, right? And maybe even outlawing those LED lights ever being on bright in an urban area, for God's sake.
Yes. Well,
I can't see anything else, right? My eyes don't react the way they used to. So I think we're gonna need to look at that, the full range, and the full range of how to use the council to highlight, bring together the coalition, have press conferences with TriMet, with other jurisdictions other than the city of Portland. Our coalition building cannot be just with the city of Portland. And that's what I will end on. This is a problem throughout the entire United States with all of our region, and they are all trying to work on it, and all of those issues should be coming to the fore, not just the city of Portland. So thank you for asking the question. And I hope I didn't create way too much work, but I think trying to find a format in which we can engage and an already known set of things that we know rise to the top, I think is where we ought to start.
absolutely. Do you want any reaction? Because everything you said was resonated, and I've got, I can respond to some of it if that would be, if you want to know where we're at.
Afterwards, let's finish this out. And I appreciate you guys working
Yeah.
so hard on this in the next step. So, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, I touched on this a little bit when I said diversion earlier, but I think we need to be really intentional around creating policy or practice when it comes to the fact that many people are nowadays on routes they don't mean to be on because of Waze or Google Maps telling them where to go. It used to be that you would take the route that was most direct or that used the system appropriately. And now we have folks on neighborhood streets because the map will estimate that it might be faster. So I really just want to not only underscore that we have the opportunity to get people onto the appropriate level of street for the length and mission of their trip, but also we need to have a policy that addresses specifically these technologies that bring people onto roads that they don't need to be on, they don't mean to be on, and are creating unsafe practices by how they're driving. So Waze, Google Maps, there's more of them. We need to address it under a safety context.
Awesome. Anybody else? Larissa had a good observation, and I think it's good to bring it up.
The article?
Yeah.
So there was a recent article, there's been several articles in the New York Times recently about traffic fatalities and how the United States is seeing an increase in fatalities at night when our comparable counterparts in other countries are not. And so there's just a lot of investigation there. And I think, I'm glad to hear the comments from council about driver behavior. I live on a main street, Fremont Street, that's a high traffic, high accident corridor. And the driver behavior that my family and I see is absolutely horrific. I don't let my children cross the street alone because people don't see them, even my 6-foot-tall 14-year-old. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing, appreciate the comments from council. And I sure hope that we can get people to behave better on the road. And even just, educating people on defensive driving and how to look for things and the very simple things that you shouldn't be doing when you're in a car. So,
Yeah, I just want to say I feel good because everything that you all brought up, we are actively, including in our work plans, and it's really helpful to hear your input. I think one thing I would like to say is that we are planning on using the Metro Council and JPAC as kind of our steering committees that we go to for a sense. The idea is to have a more ad hoc approach to engagement rather than having a standing committee that we create with the sort of usual suspects. We're going to be doing a lot more touch points and ad hoc engagement to kind of get to the broad range of people that we want to your point, Councilor, President Peterson. So, but then coming back to our technical and policy advisory committees to kind of update them and let them know where we're going. So that's our idea right now, but you know, we're still working on that engagement strategy. So if you have any thoughts on that,
All
different
right.
idea.
Love to hear how that goes, but I'd like you to keep this in the back of your head. Community engagement has to not only bring information into Metro, but has to also be educational to the broader community so that people are hearing from each other. And I'm worried that we might end up having people siloed and never hear each other. And so if it's just your conversation and it's brought up to a technical committee, I don't know if we've got that engagement across from the, I'm gonna use my trucker and my bus
Yeah.
operator example, right? Of what does the curb extension mean to the truck operator and how does it get designed? And what is that iterative learning and how do we create that culture of learning? So I understand what you're trying to do, and maybe it moves a little faster, but let's test it out and see how it goes.
Okay, yeah, that's our goal too, to reach those, or to get those diverse points of
Yeah.
view and to educate as well.
Having done a crosswalk protest in the city of Lake Oswego, downtown A Avenue at Fifth Street 25 years ago, where we shut down the street because they weren't gonna put the crosswalks back on. Again, another way to include Metro Council. And other, I mean, more direct action, I guess, is what I would encourage you to think about in that flashlight, that light that we can shine, that people participate in, bring attention to the issue. Let's not just make it all behind the scenes, quiet coalition building, hoping that we move something forward. I think there's more we can do with our partners. Okay. Still might have signs saved up.
Maybe I could just add one
Yeah.
follow-on to that. I think what we're hearing really strongly from all of you is the reinforcement of that broad-based public health approach. And then what I am hearing sort of an undertone or an underlying assumption is that it's a campaign approach. It's not just an engagement approach, but it's actually public health is successful because it does campaigns. And of course, campaigns are multifaceted and expensive, but I appreciate your prodding us to think about that. And we will bring elements back to you. We already do some of it through the RUFA program and other things that you'll see as we roll it out, but I appreciate being pressed to think about it harder and think about what those campaign elements might look like with you all. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. It's exciting work. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Keep the good work up. All right. We'll move on to recycling and garbage. I kind of wanted to, on Marta's behalf, say, and now we have wishful recycling. After all that education, everybody wants to participate. Good morning.
Good morning.
Our next agenda item is Garbage and Recycling Systems Facility Plan Engagement Update. Metro is actively engaging partners on a long-range plan for facility investment that meets goals to reduce garbage, improve service quality and access, and keep services affordable. The Garbage and Recycling System Facilities Plan will take a holistic view of the system and help clarify Metro's role in the garbage and recycling. As you'll recall, Council, in November 2023, Council considered 4 draft scenarios to meet the values and outcomes of the system facilities plan and fill gaps in the regional system. Today, Council has the opportunity to review and discuss stakeholder input on the 4 scenarios and next steps for developing a preferred options. Here with us is Marta McGuire, WPS Director, and staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Council President Peterson and councilors. Again, my name is Marta McGuire, Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Director, and I use she, her pronouns. I have here with me Marissa Grass, Principal Public Affairs Specialist, and Luis Sandoval, Principal Planner, who are part of the System Facilities Plan team. We're pleased to be here today to continue our discussion on the System Facilities Plan and share what we heard in the engagements to date, and just to have the time to continue our conversations. Next slide. Just a reminder of our department's primary mission to protect people and the environment, and we do that through managing garbage and recycling safely for people and the environment. Next slide. As you know, the Regional Waste Plan provides a framework for how Metro will work with partners in the region to achieve the regional outcomes that are listed here. The System Facilities Plan will provide key direction on how to advance progress towards these regional waste outcomes by addressing existing infrastructure gaps. Next slide. The life cycle framework provides us with a lens to consider where we can have the most impact in advancing progress toward these outcomes. More than 2.5 million tons of garbage moves through our system each year at the end of life and in that blue cycle there, or that blue part of the diagram. Next slide. Key decisions and direction we are seeking from you in the coming months are listed in these 3 areas: the System Facilities Plan that we're talking about today, our upcoming discussions around budget and fees, and other key policy items. Next slide. Today's discussion, again, is focused on the System Facilities Plan. The plan is working to determine the right set of capital investments to achieve the goals within the Regional Waste Plan of reducing waste, improving access to facilities, keeping services affordable, and improving system resilience. And with that, I will turn it over to Marissa, who's going to jump into today's presentation.
Thank you. So Marissa Grass, and I use she, her pronouns, and it's my first time being in front of you, so I'm really excited to be here today. We're going to cover a sort of mid-phase 3 update. So we'll cover what we did, what we learned, and what's next. I'm going to give a quick engagement recap. I'll talk about some key takeaways, and then we can talk about what's next to choose a preferred set of investments. Next slide. So this is the project timeline, and in phase 1, the project team worked with council to identify the values and outcomes that were based on the Regional Waste Plan, and then to conduct a gap analysis to identify current and future facility needs. And right now, we're in phase 3 to develop a preferred scenario. And I'm going to start by just kind of going briefly over those first 2 items. And so next slide. So this is a photo of Metro South, and when I think about the need for the Systems Facilities Plan, I really think about Metro South. It opened to the public on April 11th in 1983, a year before I was born, and it was originally designed to host an incinerator, and then later converted into a transfer station, expected to handle, I think, 80 tons of waste per day. And so we fast forward, and now the facility, let's see, in 2023, I think it was 329,000 or about, so an increase of about 12%. And I've learned a lot from the site supervisor, Matt Tracy, about what that means for their staff. And so, you know, he says, like, we really do the best we can to operate safe in a facility that is overburdened. But there really are opportunities that are missed as far as, I think there's something happening with the slides. Okay.
It keeps advancing on its own.
Okay.
We'll do our best to keep it on the right.
Sounds great. I'll roll with it too. So he says, you know, frankly, we do pretty well. However, to keep high quality materials out of landfills, to have more space to separate out reusable or repairable items, and to ensure safety, including traffic flow, that redevelopment of the site is needed. Next slide. The values and outcomes really underscores the importance of achieving these goals for our community. So for example, excellent service, healthy people, resource conservation. Next slide. So the next phase of the project in phase 2 was the system gaps, and we used engagement and technical analysis to learn about gaps in the system. The technical analysis was focused on 14 different groups of facilities and organized by the materials that they process. The 2 images here represent those gaps, so for the residential and small business customers versus the gaps for commercial customers. Next slide. So as just one example, recycling depots can take a larger variety of items than what can be recycled curbside. These depots are often far from community centers, however. So this is a photo of Metro Central, and you can see that folks have the opportunity to drop off several items, e-waste or antifreeze. And although there are many facilities in the region that accept recyclable materials from the public, Only a few provide this type of one-stop location where people can take multiple types of materials. So based on feedback in phase 2 of this project and also in past projects, we know that people living in the region really value a place where they can have a single place that accepts multiple materials. They don't have to drive around to different locations. Next slide. In phase 3, we did targeted engagement, really inviting stakeholders to help us understand what policy tools, so whether that's building or renovating metro facilities, investing in private facilities, or new policies or programs, would provide a range of options in the draft scenarios that were described in the discussion guide for the symposium. Next slide. I'm gonna start the slide in the middle because the symposium was really the main event in phase 3. The reuse, recycling, garbage symposium was the department's largest engagement in person since COVID. It was attended by over 120 participants from community, local government, reuse and repair, industry, and was really designed to bring those stakeholders together and hear from each other. The activities pre-symposium really helped us to build the scenarios. That's where we were able to ask specific questions from stakeholder groups. And then post-symposium allowed us to follow up and learn more based on what we heard at the symposium. Next slide. We held really key conversations with stakeholders early in the process as we were building those scenarios. So we met with local government representatives pictured here at the Education and Outreach Retreat. We were talking about how we could increase reuse and repair with both local government staff and regional educators. Next slide. We also held a reuse and repair workshop where we met with a small group of nonprofits and businesses to talk about different ways the system facilities plan could support their work. And the scenarios each presented a different reuse and repair infrastructure in response to what we learned in that workshop. And next slide. And then the project team conducted one-on-one interviews on the phone with private industry representatives, owners and managers of garbage and recycling businesses in the metro region. We wanted to understand industry's needs and also their desired role in developing future facilities that would fill the gaps and meet project goals. We heard, for just one example, that there's generally low interest in owning or operating facilities that accept household hazardous waste from the public. Next slide. And then ongoing throughout this phase, we also met with the community advisory group for this project and also Metro's Committee on Racial Equity. It really helped to deepen our understanding of how the proposed scenarios could impact our community. This is a photo of the community advisory group on a tour at Metro South. And they helped us come up with the benefits and challenges of each scenario that we actually printed as part of the discussion guide so that as folks were reviewing the scenarios, they could also hear from those community members. Next slide. And this is a short video just to take us all back to the symposium.
We are so happy you're here to talk about a subject that is near and dear to Metro's heart: reuse, recycling, and garbage. We hope today is filled with rich, solutions-generating conversation. You have been invited as community leaders and partners because...
Can we turn up the volume on Zoom, please?
We are so happy you're here to talk about a subject that is near and dear to Metro's heart: reuse, recycling, and garbage. We hope today is filled with rich, solutions-generating conversation. You have been invited as community leaders and partners because at Metro, we don't believe in planning for the future in isolation. We believe your perspective and expertise should inform our region's future at a moment when the stakes could not be higher.
This morning, we are so fortunate to be joined by an international panel of experts from around the globe to share innovative solutions that their country or region have implemented to reduce waste and ensure equitable and accessible services. They are here to prompt our thinking and preparation to roll up our sleeves this afternoon in our workshops to plan for the future of our own system.
It's a big region, and we have a big task ahead as we care for and respond to the garbage and recycling needs of our changing community. Amidst climate change, threats to water resources, increased risk of wildfires, and other challenges like the changing habits of consumers. But we know that with your help, your perspective and creativity, solutions to these seemingly endless challenges will emerge.
I have to admit that I get really excited every time I see that video. The pandemic was long for the community engagement professionals out there, and just seeing people seated together at a table with Post-its and flip charts, like, it really just warms my heart. So thanks for that opportunity to do that on this project.
Sticky? Weren't there digital things?
There were, it's not the same. No. So the symposium was split in two parts. So first with the international panel and then the engagement workshop. And during the workshop, we collected feedback in two ways, through a survey and at table discussions. And during the event, we had about 50 people take the survey. Next slide. We also had an opportunity to tour with some of the international panel participants to visit and chat with local nonprofits and businesses. And I know that some of you joined us for these. Next slide. And then we held follow-up workshops with audiences like Unite and Adelante. So this is a photo from just last week. Luis presented to Adelante. And this workshop was held in Spanish, and participants shared feedback about the ways that they really wanted to be involved in the system. And we met just last night with Unite Oregon and really heard the same thing. So what it might look like if they wanted to, for example, open a reuse business. What would that look like in the future of the system? Next slide. We continue to meet with and engage our waste prevention and environmental services staff, including frontline workers and members of the Equity Change team. So we had 60 staff take the survey, and we'll be reporting on those results separately. But just really quick about staff's preferences, we did hear support for one-stop facilities that take multi-materials for reuse, and we also heard concern about space and safety at existing facilities. Next slide. On November 9th, Council took a straw poll to indicate early preference for the different scenarios. And of these scenarios, we heard the most support for the distributed and no-build scenarios. However, it was with many caveats, including and especially how facilities can support additional waste reduction, how do we support existing private and nonprofit folks in the system, how do we solve for geographic equity, and really underscoring the importance of safety. Next slide. We really heard something really similar from audiences in the survey at the symposium, and then we've used the survey with a few of the audiences since that time. So really a preference for the distributed scenario followed by no build. And then always with the caveat, because 80% of respondents indicated that they would like to make changes to their preferred scenario. So those two come out on top, but a lot of folks would like to make changes within those scenarios. Next slide. And the distributed scenario includes a network of mid-sized facilities with separate facilities for public and commercial customers. And some of the things people liked about the distributed scenario were those services that were available to the general public, and also how the scenario met policy priorities for waste reduction, access, and affordability. We heard specifically that improved access in Washington County and East Multnomah County is important, as well as improved access metro-wide to reuse and repair as a way to reduce waste. And the distributed scenario also provides an opportunity to bring together the community's desire for one-stop drop-off with the recycling depots that are being envisioned as part of the Recycling Modernization Act. Other themes, one was capacity, so a question about if the smaller reuse hubs in the scenario would provide enough capacity, and then also on education and outreach. So because this would be a shift from the status quo, additional education and outreach would be important. And additionally, some folks would like to see space for education and outreach included at future facilities. Next slide. So noting that almost everyone would make changes to their preferred scenario, we also looked at what aspects of each scenario were most popular. So you can see at the top there that public facilities that include reuse and recycling centers were most popular, followed by a dedicated fee to invest in reuse organizations and businesses. And I wanted to highlight that although the full service scenario was less popular for most stakeholders, two elements from that scenario, the reuse mall and the reuse warehouse hub, were among the most supported elements. Next slide. This slide shows the survey results for level of investment. And for me, I think the key takeaway here is that folks really supported investment over none of the above. And in fact, over 80% of several of our audience groups were supportive of an additional $3 to fund the distributed scenario. Our industry respondents did have the most divergent responses from all survey participants, with about 30% indicated that they supported none of the above or zero price increase. However, overall for that category of respondents, the number that support the $3 was still over 50%.
Before you go to the next slide, Madam President, may I ask a clarifying question? $3 per month on what fee? Please.
So this is $3 per month on the average residential garbage bill.
Okay. And how does that translate into a per ton fee? Because, and a regional service fee? Because that's how we would pay for it, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have, I can look those up while we finish the presentation, because I don't know them off the top of my head. I can look at the discussion guide. We included that information in the discussion guide and the supplementary materials, and we translated that to the impact on the average single-family monthly bill as a way to understand the impact on the final customer. But I can.
I'll discuss it during questions.
Luis?
I just wanted to understand
Mike?
what it was. Thanks.
Next slide. Metro also invited consultation with 7 tribes who've engaged with Metro's Tribal Affairs program. We held meetings with interested tribes in late 2022 and early 2023, and this led to an opportunity to partner with the Portland area office of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians for a community member conversation. It was held this month. And a summary of that feedback is included as an attachment in your packet. I listed just 2 bullet points here about the impacts of facilities on the environment and human health, and then also an ask to do more about plastic pollution, stronger incentives for recycling at work, and working closely with the state on the Recycling Modernization Act. Next slide. So in summary, we heard support for investing in facilities that separate commercial customers and self-haul public customers. And that includes reuse and recycling centers, and specifically the reuse mall and reuse warehouse concept. Other investment priorities included investing in existing infrastructure, improving safety, stable funding for reuse infrastructure. And while there was a desire to invest, there's also a desire to keep costs down. Next slide.
Of course.
So what's next? The project team will work with council to create a preferred scenario that incorporates what we heard. As you know, the final combo of scenario elements doesn't need to be one scenario or another. It's really expected to be a combination of the components or scenario elements that moves forward into phase 4 in a draft plan. Next slide. And the project team is currently hard at work developing a range of options to meet council preferences and stakeholder feedback. We really imagine bringing that conversation to you in 3 areas, so in 3 key areas. So the public self-haul facilities, commercial facilities, and then reuse facilities and programs. And council will have time to discuss the trade-offs before selecting a preferred scenario. Next slide. And we just have 2 discussion questions for you for today. Do you have any questions on what we did or what we heard? And is there anything from the engagement report that stands out to you? So turn it back to you. Thank you.
Counselors? Questions, comments? Counselor Nolan?
Thanks, Madam President. I will follow up a little bit on that. I'm trying to understand how we make some of those trade-offs. I love it when people want expanded service and somehow think it will magically appear out of the goodness of someone's heart. So I'll just lay that out as an issue, that people want expanded services, but I don't know that we have yet delved into. You did ask questions about $4.10 and $3, but I think we need to delve quite a bit more. And I think we've raised geographic equity, which I believe we mean a preference for what's known as a postage stamp rate. Wherever you are in the service area, the cost is the same, no matter the cost of delivering it to your address. It's more expensive to provide curbside recycling service to an area that has a density of 5 units per acre than an area that has a density of 120 units, households per acre. And I want us to delve more into that. If we're trying to make things convenient for folks on the edges of our service area, I want to know how that's affecting constituents, for example, that I represent, who are within the service boundary and who live in a city to have municipal services. And I have a question of whether we need to subsidize or whether it's appropriate to subsidize people living in much less dense areas. Maybe, but not necessarily. Higher income on average, and so $3 a month may not seem like a lot to the people in this room, but it certainly seems like a lot to a lot of the people I represent. And I have an equity question of whether we should be asking low-income people who live in more densely developed parts of the region to subsidize services for people who've chosen to move away from those services or to locate away from those services. I'll put that out. I also am really interested in our definition of who the stakeholders in this system are, and we are dealing with private transfer station operators and reuse folks. But if bulky waste disposal is an issue, there are junk haulers that aren't included in our definition of the system that may be able to meet that service. So I'm interested in much more exploration of those factors and those issues, policy questions.
And we did have junk haulers attend the symposium, so we did include those folks as part of our stakeholders and invite for the symposium.
Okay. So we don't define them, though, as part of the delivery system. the way we seem to be defining reuse smalls or reuse nonprofits.
Because they provide a service that fills a gap. I wanted to just touch on two things that you said with regards to geographic equity. I really appreciate you highlighting that through a cost lens. When we're using that term within this presentation, we're looking at it through an access lens. So individuals that live on the west side don't have access to the same level of service that people do that live close to the transfer stations that household hazardous waste facilities. So, your comment around geographic equity as it relates to cost is important too. But I just wanted to clarify, when we're using that term, it's looking at access to facilities and services. I also appreciate comments around cost sensitivities and how the impacts of rate increases impact residents differently. One important goal and strategy that we have within the regional waste plan is low-income rate assistance programs. So that's something that local governments have responsibility towards. Washington County is one of the first jurisdictions that has adopted a low-income rate assistance program to help mitigate those impacts when it really matters, like the differences in when there are rate increases for different communities. The other thing to know, the takeaway on the level of investment, we wanted to get a sense of, are people willing to pay more for these services? Because what we're seeing out in different communities is that people are willing to pay for subscription services to recycle additional products that aren't, additional materials that aren't provided with their residential services. Ridwell is a great example of that. People are paying more to have that service. And so we wanted to see relatively, are people willing to pay more? And we took that, what the cost would be on the regional system fee, and estimated that at a monthly cost to an individual's garbage bill. I think our communities within the region have a value around the environment and the importance of recycling. I think that's one of the things that really stands out around our region when you come. And like from the time that I moved here from the Midwest, there was way more that you could recycle at the curb than we ever could. So I think that that's just an important thing to keep in mind, that people want more, expect more from the garbage and recycling system in this region. And this gives us some level of indicator that folks are willing to invest more in that to have that additional service. But I realize we need to dig deeper into it.
I would question if you'd get the same response if the question had been posed. Should we increase the garbage fee of low income or benefit dependent households in order to provide additional services on the edges of the metro service area?
I don't think we would get the same response, but I feel like when we can look at other strategies to address, like low-income rate assistance, to address the disproportionate impacts of garbage bills, we can look at how we can provide more service and pay for it.
Yeah.
As we go through the questions, I think that there is also something in Counselor Nolan's comments that I'd like to hear from the other counselors, and that is, and this is part of our further conversations, but it's what role does Metro play versus others? So we are identifying needs, but we need to figure out what role Metro plays through time and where we're headed. And what is a public-private partnership and what is just private, right? So all three of those, and I think that's where I need a lot more information as we go through and narrow this down of what needs are and who could meet them and what are the methodologies in which we could meet them. So I would like to hear from other counselors as well. Counselor Rosenthal, then Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like the report so far. I'm not surprised that the distributed has received a great deal of support, and it's what I heard at the symposium. And my question, and well, actually I have two questions, but the first question is, how do we decide, in other words, the spacing? One of the things I heard from the international component was that these things serve a fairly small watershed, you might say, or waste shed, recycle shed, a small recycle shed. In other words, people, is a convenience factor. How do we estimate the convenience factor, and therefore how do we determine how many of these distributed sites we have? And then the other question sort of related to that is, as we know that in some areas the recycling of hard to recycle or hard to get rid of plastics and things like that has been very popular through the private sector. Did you hear any comments on whether or not that should be included in these distributive service centers, or whether we should find some other way to expand that? I'm just was wondering, because we have a lot of unincorporated areas that may or may not, that are not served by this.
Great question. There was a drive time assumption built into the different scenarios to kind of get at that convenience factor that you're talking about that Luis can speak to.
Yeah, we focused on the measure of travel time to the nearest facility for different types of materials. So in the discussion guide, we focus on public facilities that are open to the public and offer what Marissa showed, the recycling depots that collect multiple materials. But we looked at 14 different material streams. And so the measure was what percentage of the population is within a 20-minute drive of the nearest facility as the starting point. And we can vary is it 15 minutes, is it 5 minutes, is it 20 minutes? We had to settle on a number, so we settled on 20 minutes. That is what we used, but you're describing, I think, a more robust definition of convenience, which also would look at hours of service. So is the facility open 5 days a week, 7 days a week? Is it open, 9 to 4 or 9 to 7, et cetera? So those are the things that we're not able to do in a short time, but we have them in the back of our minds when designing these options. And we have taken your feedback in the past very seriously about to take into account one recycling depot per 100,000 to 200,000 people. And we have looked at what the different scenarios we're proposing. The distributed scenario obviously gets to a threshold that is closer to what you mentioned before, but not entirely. I think we ended up with one facility per 250,000 people in the distributed scenario, as opposed to some metric that I am not remembering exactly what you mentioned, but it was lower.
Thanks.
But we're keeping that in mind, and that's part of the feedback that we are using to come up with narrow down the set of options for bringing to council for consideration.
And the reason I ask is when I talk to local jurisdictions, some of them have an idea that there's going to be one of these in almost every neighborhood, and some have the idea that there's going to be something that's going to be 20, 25 minutes away. So it's a question that has to be resolved, but not at this point in time.
And on the question of the hard-to-recycle materials, the reuse and recycling centers in the distributed model were assumed to take those, as well as the facilities in the full-service scenario. And then in the no-bill scenario, you have investment in private facilities where Metro would basically invest in private facilities to accept a certain list of materials, including hard-to-recycle materials, much more so than it is currently done at the public depots at Metro transfer stations and at the private depots that exist at private facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thanks so much. I really appreciate the wrap-up of what the engagement surveys showed. I guess I am wondering, so there were 50 surveys at the conference. How many surveys overall, though?
I think 62.
Okay, so we did go well beyond just the conference participation. Great, thank you. And I guess in response to Councilor Nolan's comments around kind of costs that are inherent based off of the hauling, in particular, urban density. I think that there's both the urban density question, but there's also the urban form question. And in the suburbs, I wonder how much efficiency one gets from having a good network of alleys compared to street collection. So I guess I'm just questioning how much of the cost driver really is at urban form versus just on the back end of what hauling companies can access at various facilities. I have a jurisdiction right now that's questioning moving to mixed food debris for food composting in with their yard. So that's having them look at different facilities to haul to than the current destination. So obviously there's travel time, and there's also a question of what is available. So I'm glad you did the 20-minute for all the different commodities. But I think the overall question that we're struggling with is what is the expectation for what is curbside collected versus self-haul, if you will, to a depot? And until we know more about the 43 depots that the region can expect out of recycling modernization and the state investment, I don't know how we answer that question. Because I'm of the mind that maybe it is okay to suggest that one has to move your batteries, whereas harder to recycle plastics like Starbucks cups should be curbside or alleyway picked up. So until we know more about how those are gonna get located, I don't know what more we need to be adding into the residential collection. And what is the timeline for learning more about those depots?
Yeah, we do have Jill here, and we've been talking about that timeline for the recycling depots and the ways that the engagement on the system facilities plan has actually been influencing her work on the Recycling Modernization Act. Jill.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. For the record, my name is Jill Hritzik. I use she, her pronouns, and I work with this lovely team. And I'm working also with DEQ and our local government and community partners on the Recycling Modernization Act. Just a quick status update of where that's at, because I think it helps with how that connects to the system facilities plan. There is about 40+ depots that they're recommending for the Portland Metro region. The producer responsibility organizations are the ones working on the program plans right now. They're the ones who are going to be footing the bill for this. And they will be submitting those plans at the end of March. Serving on the Recycling Council, I will be working with private and public entities to be reviewing these program plans. And part of it includes those types of depot collections. And working with local governments, we're hoping that there's going to be two options that we can have for our region. One could be additional enhanced collection service. So there could be potential materials that we could collect at the curb. That could be, for example, plastic film or something like that that gets caught in the machine, so you don't want that in the recycling bin, but maybe that could be in something like the glass bin. But for other materials we have that are on that list, like single-use propane canisters, it's not necessarily, it's a hazardous waste, and it's not necessarily something we want on the side of the road. So that's what we're looking at, of how can the depots complement that. So it wouldn't just be one location you would have for that, but it could be a multi-material depot where we could take that. And then mattresses are also coming into our system in the future too for recycling. So where could the mattresses go? We're just looking at this with all the different EPR programs. How could we maximize the use of that? Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, so end of March, the report is a public document, or is it just due in and it's still in a black box of a government agency we can't see?
Oh no, that when that program plans are submitted in, those will be public because that will be sent to the Recycling Council members.
Okay.
And those will be public posted. And we can make sure that that's also shared with this group too. And as we go along, we can share any type of updates of things that we would want to flag that would be impacting our region.
Great, thank you. I think that's the backbone of what we think we're doing next. So it's going to be really important we build off of it, and those assumptions are coming at us. So I look forward to that.
Yes, and the idea is that those negotiations will start with existing facilities, and then the idea is that there's a longer timeline within it, but 2025 is when RMA becomes operative to the public, and then there's going to be a further timeline for depots. But it just is really great timing with the system facilities plan for us to make how we want to make our investments.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wong.
If I may, Councilor Lewis, I just wanted to clarify that. So you're talking about Recycling Modernization Act and the depots that Joe was mentioning. The list of materials currently being considered for depot collection paid for by the PRO is a small list, right? It has 10 materials or so, so far. So when we talk about RMA, we're talking about a very small slice of total waste generation in the region. When we talk about system facilities plan and this multi-material facilities, we're talking about a larger share, right? With the yard debris, with wood, with household hazardous waste. So there's a question of, do we wait for the RMA for that small slice to make decisions about investment in the region, or can we do them in parallel or anticipating what we know about the implementation of the RMA?
Yeah, I guess the way I think of it is, when you have those starting to get plopped down on the map, maybe you know where you could co-locate. So if we want to take household hazardous waste out of Metro South, add back that space for, more productive use, then you could co-locate with something that was already getting built close by in Clackamas. Or maybe the depot would want to co-locate with us, right?
Exactly. That is the other aspect of the Recycling Modernization Act, which it prioritizes existing infrastructure. So that's why Central and South would be prioritized for location of an RMA depot. The PROs are obligated to approach those facilities first and offer the opportunity to collect PRO materials at those facilities. If the facilities, it doesn't pan out financially, then they go on to the next facilities or build new facilities. But the RMA is designed to prioritize existing infrastructure. So if Metro were to build more facilities, those would count as existing infrastructure.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Wong.
Great, thank you, Madam President. And, thank you for all the work. I attended the symposium most of the day and found it really fascinating and exciting. And I think my question is really kind of related to kind of the process going forward and, how important the process can be in work like this. And sometimes it's even more important than, what we finally decide on. So I noticed, you also did tribal consultation in the appendices, and I'm just wondering, what is kind of the interplay between all this engagement that you've done, and then how is that gonna, craft kind of your work plan and recommendations, and then how are you gonna continue to engage folks that, participated before, whether it was through, tribal consultation, connections with CBOs, industry. What does that engagement process look like? Because it looks like there's going to be a couple different decision-making points before we have the final version. So, we don't want to do the one-off engagement, thanks for your input, and then never do that report back. So what does that feedback loop kind of look like? Are we doing another symposium sometime? That would be great. It was really fun. But yeah, how do we build that consensus, across our stakeholders?
I can speak to it at a broad level, and then if Luis and Marissa want to add on additional detail. Looking at the 5 phases of the project, our intention has been, and our strategy has been to engage all of those different stakeholder groups in advance of every decision point. So we're making sure that the stakeholder feedback is helping guide and inform decisions that you want to make moving forward. So we started with a big picture of the 4 scenarios to look at where there were preferences, where individual groups saw benefits and challenges to help inform the next steps. And so now we're at a point where we will develop options for those 3 different key areas, trying to chunk some of this out, looking at specifically public self-haul facilities, looking at commercial facilities, and looking at reuse facilities and programs, and developing options under each of those categories. So you can look at the trade-offs of Metro's role in each of those categories, and also bringing in the feedback that we heard. And then following that, there would be additional engagement as we slowly, looping back to stakeholders. This is what we heard. This is what is the next iteration, getting your feedback on that. So it's kind of it is an ongoing process, an iterative process.
I just have an opportunity here to recognize the project managers on this project, because I've worked in engagement, and a lot of times at the beginning of the project, you'll set out an engagement plan. Okay, this is what we're gonna do, and this is the tool, and this is the time. And I've really appreciated working with this team because they're very responsive. So where we've needed to slow down or learn more, we've held additional engagement. So for example, with the reuse partners, they really work to help shape the reuse options that were provided in the scenarios. So while we have the plan and, so the plan is in advance of major decisions to, go back to our stakeholders and get more feedback. Also really checking in with specific groups when needed. And then we have the community advisory group that is ongoing and will be meeting this year as well.
Yeah, I think it's just really important for us to be able to say, we heard your feedback and here's what we, considered, and here are the options that we have ahead of us.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And perhaps it has taken us longer than we anticipated because of the additional engagement that we did after the symposium to get back to stakeholders and say, this is the input you gave at the symposium and afterwards, and this is how we're using it. That's what we're hoping to come back to you in the spring to say, this is how we use the input to design these options within those 3 areas. And it's a narrower set of options than the scenarios. And these different options are supported by these different audiences from what we have been hearing throughout the project, but especially in phase 3. So that's how we, and that's at that point we go back out to report, and this is what we heard from council about the feedback that you gave and the options and how it's been narrowed down. And then with tribal engagement, that is an ongoing process, and there's a chance that we might get more input from tribal governments on the next phase, on the draft plan, the draft final plan, because at that point we will know whether Metro will be investing in new or existing facilities, whether private or public, and that is usually an area of more interest from tribal governments, the impact on natural resources, archaeological resources, and cultural resources.
And forgive me, because I should know this, but when is the expected kind of final draft and decision-making point for us?
We're looking at the fall, winter of next year.
Okay, great. Well, looking forward to updates then.
On that note, as we move forward, when do we narrow down to just the distributed model? Because it sounds like that's where the council kind of came down, that's where community engagement is. Maybe it's something slightly different. You can let me know if I'm off base there, but it sounds like that's what we're coalescing around. And then how do we work in iteration between the council and staff and the community to develop the scenarios around distributed and what our options are on that? So I'll put that question out there first, and then I have a follow-up.
Thank you for asking that question. Based on the feedback, what you saw and what you heard from Marissa is that there was agreement, really broad support around distributed and no build. However, there were lots of exceptions in there and a couple of full service reuse mall options in there. But we are taking those preferences to present to you a refined set of options. So we're at that narrowing point right now, using what we heard from council in November to narrow that field of options, to bring that back to you in more of a workshop style format, so we can look at what are the trade-offs of the different choices that Metro may want to make, and getting to your role question. So that's the intention of that next step, is to have a narrow conversation. It doesn't mean that you can't go back to the full scenarios and say, well, I really wanted this one. But our intention is to take what we've heard so far and do that narrowing now, so we can have a discussion around the trade-offs of those options to get to move this forward.
Great. As we prepare for that narrowing down and yet expanding, when we talk about the criteria upon which we'll be making a decision, I think that's a key conversation. And I think what I have heard from the council as we go through this is, yes, there is the, because this is a utility, and we're trying to have a conversation as though we were managing a utility. There is the desire for the outcomes on the environment and the, decreasing waste that is actually going to the landfill and those typical, but we also are digging in, obviously, to the costs and how we charge and how we change our role or not change our role based on where we're charging and what we're charging. So I think this first iteration where we were learning how to kind of get into this in more detail, I think that was one of the things that we came back and had to add back in is like, what does that cost structure look like? Where are we charging? Who gets charged? And I just want to make sure that that is not left out of the next iteration and maybe even expanded upon as the criteria so that we fully understand well, you can never fully understand. We have a better understanding of the impacts out there and who benefits, who loses, and who stays neutral in these, both from the private, the public, and the users, right, the consumers, so that we have that full understanding of where we're not just cost shifting and moving it around and not getting better outcomes, but we're actually making better outcomes. That would just be my quick comment.
Yep.
Thank you.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Great. Thank you. Thanks for continuing to work through and create a culture of learning between the council and staff and the greater community. It's exciting to see. Thank you.
Thank you.
And keep up the sticky notes in person. All right, we'll move on to Chief Operating Officer Communications, Marisa.
Thank you, President Peterson, and good afternoon, Council. Today, I just have a 2023 compliance report as required by Metro's code. I'm submitting to the Metro Council the annual report detailing the status of our region's cities and counties' compliance with the requirements of the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan and the Regional Transportation Functional Plan. Compliance with the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan includes meeting requirements related to housing, water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, flood hazards, protecting industrial and employment lands, and planning for areas added to the UGB. All jurisdictions are in compliance at this time, with the exception of a few jurisdictions that are working to complete planning in areas that are that have been added to the UGB. Compliance with the Regional Transportation Functional Plan includes meeting requirements for system design, updating of transportation system plans, transportation project development, regional parking management, and amendments to comprehensive plans. The report shows that all jurisdictions are currently in compliance. Appendix D of the report, and this is in your packet for today. Appendix D of the report also satisfies a Metro code requirement for me to report to you on the changes made last year to the Title IV Employment and Industrial Areas Map, otherwise known as the Title IV Map. Appendix D explains that in September of last year, Metro amended the Title IV map following the request of the City of Happy Valley to conform the map with its newly adopted land use plan for the Pleasant Valley North Carver area. The order also updated the map to reflect the UGB land swap adopted by the Metro Council in February of 2023. Staff anticipates that the number of requests for Title IV map amendments may increase in the next few years as local plans and regional economic needs continue to change. A refresh of the 2040 growth concept would offer an opportunity for policy and regulatory updates, including an update of the Title IV map as well. MPAC has received a copy of this report as required by the Metro Code, and JPAC and PERC will receive and review the report as well at upcoming meetings. The report will also be sent to the 24 cities and 3 counties for their review and then posted to Metro's website. And again, this report is included in your meeting packet today. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any questions on that? Seeing none, we'll move on to counselor communications. Counselors. Counselor Lewis.
Sure, yesterday, the Supportive Housing Services Oversight Committee met, and the bulk of the meeting was spent drafting the report that they will give to us. And they went through a Jamboard and used those virtual sticky notes, and it went quite well. And they meet again on the 12th because they're actually writing this thing together. So they will have 3 meetings within 5 weeks, I think, coming up, just to get this one landed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, Counselor Wong.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to report back on the last 82nd Avenue Steering Committee meeting. Last Thursday, Councilor Lewis and I were able to co-chair, and we had a great discussion on the potential northern terminus for 82nd Avenue. And in a kind of temperature check, the steering committee endorsed Cully being kind of a 1A option and continuing to study Park Rose. Due to many factors, I think the airport has kind of fallen off, but we're hopeful that either Cully or Park Rose will be the right fit. We'll be taking the summer off to do some more planning and then hoping to come to a final LPA later this fall. This delay won't impact the project delivery, if everything goes to plan.
Great, thank you. Anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, we are adjourned, and we'll see you back here for council meeting on Thursday. Thanks.